Welcome! Today we're going to be talking about NES games that deserve sequels. I am here with MrMatthews of YouTube to help me talk about this topic. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm great. How are you, Chris?
I'm great.
Glad to be here to talk about NES again.
Yeah, we're both giant NES fans, so this is why I asked Rob to join me on this, because we just love to talk about this console. We both grew up with it. It's a big part of our past. But I wanted to talk about some games on the console that did not get sequels, or in the normal way of thinking of a sequel.
Right.
We kind of bend the rules with this a little bit, as you'll see later on. But we have 10 games for you, and I'm going to start it off with the very first one, which is Guardian Legend. An absolutely amazing game by Compile, released in 1988. It's kind of like a hybrid action-adventure game, kind of mixes kind of like Zelda with a vertical shmup. It's just amazing gameplay. There's really nothing else like it. Have you played this one before?
It's been on my list to play, and I've watched people play. Obviously, it's a game that comes up quite often in like hidden gems on the NES. So I've heard how great it is. I just haven't actually gotten around to actually trying it out myself yet.
Sure. It's all good. It's a great game. I just played it. I had played it before, like in probably like the early 2000s, but I just went through and finished it completely last year. So I'm fairly new to the game, but I loved it. I completely fell in love with it. It's an amazing game, and I assumed they had gotten a sequel because I had seen so much praise for it, and I just kind of guessed that there was a Guardian Legend 2 somewhere that I hadn't seen or hadn't heard of because I wasn't really as into the series. Or sorry, the game that's not a series until just recently, but it did not, surprisingly. But I would love to see. I would have loved to see a sequel. Obviously, I don't think we're getting a Guardian Legend sequel anytime soon here. But a few things I'd like to see with a potential or a sequel that could have happened but didn't is a bigger map. First off, the map was like, it's not small. There's a lot to explore, but I would have loved to see something that was even bigger. As obviously the memory improved with these NES cartridges as time went on, they could probably fit more on there. And I'd also love to see more non-weapon abilities to make the gameplay a little bit like more interesting and less repetitive. Because all of the power-ups were pretty much just all different weapons, which was cool. It worked really well, and it was a lot of fun. But I would have loved stuff like, a quick dodge, or like a dash, or like defensive barriers, more like defensive ways and like ways to kind of like, move out of the way of enemies and kind of traverse maybe a bit quicker. That would have, made the gameplay loop a bit more interesting and, like I said, less repetitive.
Now, just for my clarification.
Yeah.
And for anyone who might not have also played the game, is it basically, my understanding kind of was that it was like a series of like kind of like Metroid levels separated by a shooter level that you used to get to the next level? Is that?
Sort of. It's more, I would say it's more like Zelda in terms of, because it's not a platformer. It's a top-down type of game.
Okay.
So it plays more like Zelda or Crystallis, I would say is another good comparison. But then you go into these other stages where they're shmup stages, they're vertical shooter stages. You have to like work through. There's a boss at the end, and you have to defeat a certain amount of these. And that I can't remember the exact story, but essentially you have to like shut down like 5 different areas, and that activates the self-destruct on this planet or ship or something like that. I can't quite remember how it works, but it's something along those lines.
Okay.
It's a lot of fun, and I think another thing that I would have loved to see in a sequel would have been less bullet spongy enemies. I think that was my biggest complaint with the game. Was in the shooter sections, the enemies in not all of the sections, but a lot of them felt way too bullet spongy as compared to something like R-Type or Gradius or Life Force Salamander. I think that's like another big thing. And then I think the final thing I'd like to see, they had puzzles. The game had puzzles that you have to like kind of figure out to open up different areas and unlock some secrets. But I'd love to see more like them expand on that a bit more, like having like maybe track down a certain like an enemy or like find a hidden passage or like destroying like a special block somewhere. I would have liked some more variety in that overall. But the game is still amazing. And I think that a sequel would just be them kind of like fine-tuning and polishing some things and maybe adding to the game a bit more than they would. But if you haven't played Guardian Legend, you should absolutely check it out. It is definitely one of the best games on the NES, in my humble opinion.
Well, sold. I'll bump it up my backlog. See if I can promote it a little bit.
You should, absolutely. What do you got? What's your number 2 or your number 1? Sorry.
Well, mine is also a shooter. I have Legendary Wings.
Yeah.
I played this game somewhat recently. I played through it somewhat recently. It's a game that I kind of feel like everyone has played, or at least is familiar with this game as kind of one of the more common games on the NES. And everyone seems to like it. It's a very, very competent game. Very, very polished Capcom. It's like it just exudes Capcom quality. It's very early.
And it is based on an arcade game.
It is.
Correct?
Yeah. My understanding is it is. I've never actually seen the arcade game. I've
never played it.
Yeah. I guess as I was playing through the game, I was just constantly just struck by how just good it is. As early as an NES title as it is, the graphics are great. The music is fantastic. I think it's even what's her name? Manami. Manami Matsume. Yeah, so it sounds like a Mega Man game. Like it sounds like Mega Man 1. It's got the same sound effects. It seems like most of the music tracks in the game could easily fit in Mega Man 1, which is a good thing. Mega Man 1 had a great soundtrack.
Is it like Life Force? I rented this back in the day. I never owned the game. I played it briefly. I rented it, I think, for a few days as a kid. So I'm like very, very foggy on how the game worked. But I recall it being vertical and horizontal.
It is a vertical / horizontal shooter, but it falls into kind of like the Xevious kind of shooters which I don't really like. So it's the one where you actually can shoot enemies in the air, but you could also drop bombs for enemies on the ground. So that's what your 2 buttons do. And you do alternate between vertical and horizontal, but the horizontal is really just kind of left for like the bonus levels and the boss levels, basically. Most of the game seems to be pretty much focused on verticality. As far as like challenge goes, it's kind of a challenging game to start, but then once you get fully powered up, the game becomes like ludicrously easy. You become like this really totally overpowered god character, basically like a phoenix, and you can just like blaze through the rest of the game. It gives you extra hit points, so you can take more damage, and then you can just keep on collecting more and more power-ups and maintain this godlike ability all the way through the game. The hardest part is probably getting to that level, and then after that, you can kind of just sail through the game, which again isn't really a bad thing. I had fun with it. I think it has mostly positive reception. Never got a sequel.
Yeah, I think so. What would you want to see in a sequel?
I guess more of the same. I'm fine with more of the same. That's kind of what you'd expect from Capcom anyway. What you'd probably get.
Would you want to like have things a little bit more difficult? Because it sounds like once you get to a certain point, you kind of like power through pretty easily. Would you like maybe tone that down in a sequel?
Yeah, maybe kind of balance out the power-ups a bit more than they were, so that you don't get overpowered so quickly. Because you could get fully powered up within the first level. Also, it's a very early game, so the bosses are all the same. So it's the same boss you're fighting, just like Gradius 1, basically.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So obviously that would need to be upgraded for a sequel. So I would basically hope for, if I were to go back in time and hope for a theoretical sequel, that it would be at least as big of a jump in quality between Legendary Wings 1 and 2 as maybe we got for Mega Man 1 and 2.
Okay.
More levels,
that was
probably better graphics, more diverse bosses, more diverse stages.
The gameplay didn't change too much, from 1 to 2, but they added like a few little things, like little bells and whistles. Which
again is kind of what you would expect, and we usually get from Capcom, just kind of like more of the same.
Capcom fashion.
But better, which I'm fine with. I'm fine with that kind of minimal. I don't even want to call it minimal effort, but like they keep their sights kind of low and kind of work with what's already there, it seems like, instead of reinventing the wheel too much.
Yeah, for sure. And just a fun little side note, Rob actually worked with me on the history of Kid Icarus. If you're coming from my main channel anyways, we put that together. And I don't know if you remember, Rob, but there was the rumored, I think Dead Phoenix or Dark Phoenix. It was that one of the Capcom 5 games that got canceled. But there was some rumors of it being repurposed to a different Capcom franchise. One of which was, or a different, I guess, Nintendo franchise or Capcom franchise. People weren't sure, but like a previous franchise.
Yeah.
One of which was Kid Icarus. But another one that was being speculated was like a 3D Legendary Wings.
Kind of to fit within the spirit of our conversation here, I would have rather seen maybe a more enhanced sequel on the NES, like a Legendary Wings 2.
Of course.
Or maybe even if I could have waited another 5 or 6 years, a much better sequel on the Super Nintendo. But, to really get crazy, it would have been fun to see an actual 3D style game on like the PS3 or what have you.
Look up the trailer for, I think it's Dead Phoenix. It's either Dead Phoenix or Dark Phoenix or something. It's one of those things. But there is a trailer for it. There's gameplay footage. And if you look at it, you can see how people would have totally linked it to Legendary Wings, potentially. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. My second game is kind of a weird one. And I know it's one we're both very fond of, strangely. But it is an LJN joint, and it is Jaws. Based on, I believe, the fourth film, not even the first one.
Yeah, it's based on Jaws 4.
And this is a 1987 LJN game developed by Atlas, surprisingly. This was an early Atlas game. And it's kind of, I would consider it a shmup. I consider it like a shooter for sure. It's not 100% that in terms of the gameplay, but the majority of the game is you under the water in this kind of like, it's not scrolling, it's just a set screen that you can kind of go up and down, and you're taking out different wildlife, sea wildlife, and trying to build your levels up to fight Jaws. It's a very short game. I think you can beat it in just a few minutes if you know what you're doing. But it's a lot of fun. It's a game that has a lot of great ideas that could have really, really benefited from a sequel that would have, a lot bigger. It's bigger. It needs to be bigger. There's a lot of great stuff there that could be expanded on. Probably my biggest thing that I'd like to see is a longer and more in-depth gameplay loop. So in the original, you're pretty much just going back and forth between two ports. Every time you go to a port, you power up a little bit more, and you're just trying to like literally sail back and forth. And every now and then you get into like a random encounter, kind of like an RPG, where you have to go into the ocean and survive and kill enough stuff long enough, and you get back in the boat and rinse and repeat, and then you go eventually kill Jaws. But I'd love to like have more maps and stages instead of just that one really tiny map. I'd love to have just like you moving from different parts of the ocean as you go along. And to also expand on that, like more exploration too, rather than just that single screen where you go up and down that was obviously made on a very tight budget. Like going through a coral reef and finding items, maybe going to like a sunken ship. They can take some liberties with the Jaws franchise, which they obviously did in this game, and then just to like to expand on the gameplay loop more, just like maybe some scrolling stages to like if they're gonna make it a shmup, kind of lean hard into that. Some mini games to like level up your ship rather than just landing at the port. That kind of stuff. Just more though, like kind of like making the experience just like bigger and longer and something you can't beat in just a matter of minutes.
You and I both are diehard. I wouldn't die for the game. We're very devout Jaws apologists.
Devout is a good.
The game gets crapped on a lot, mainly because it's developed by LJN, or not developed, mainly because it's published by LJN, and LJN doesn't really have the best reputation, even though that name has nothing to do with the quality of the games, really, that they are credited for. And Jaws is probably the best example of that, I think. You get companies like Rare and Atlas. Westone, is it West One or Westone?
West, I'm not sure. I believe they were involved with this game too.
Like top tier, respectable developers by today's standards, developing LJN games. So it's unfair that they just kind of got crapped on, mainly because of being a video game nerd, I think. But as far as like a sequel goes, it would have been fun to see, like, I don't know how you'd actually work this out, but have like a larger map, like you said, but maybe different ports give you different attributes. Like you need to go to this port to level up your power. Maybe this port to level up your boat. So like there's a bit more, like clearly they were kind of inspired by RPG type games.
Yeah.
Because the whole game is basically level grinding, the game. You're just basically like, you can see Jaws right away as soon as you start the game. You just need to level up to be strong enough to actually beat him.
And this is what Dragon Quest mania was kind of starting to sweep Japan at this point. I'm not sure if I don't even think Final Fantasy was out at this point, but Dragon Quest 1, potentially Dragon Quest 2 was already out. So I know that really pushed Famicom development in a certain way, which obviously you saw in a lot of these late 87, early 88 games for the Famicom and NES. Something else I would like to see more of is, rather than it just be Jaws the whole game, I like the entire, so as you're going through this game, the Jaws has his own life bar that is displayed on the screen at all times. Anytime you do damage on him, that damage stays. I think he can heal over time, but that damage stays for a while. So you're kind of like in this constant cat and mouse situation where you're trying to track him down and finish him off, but you're doing damage over time as like you're kind of going back and forth through these ports and getting powered up, which I think is really, really cool. But like, I think it'd be interesting to like hunt other stuff too, like, you know, like a giant manta ray or like a killer whale or just like a giant squid or something like that. Having like other things that you would have to hunt in like a different stage or a different map before Jaws. But I really would love for them to keep that consistent boss health bar that just stays with you the whole time during gameplay.
Or maybe like almost structured like almost like ActRaiser, where like there's 5 or 6 levels, but each level is a different ocean map scene, and maybe you're fighting a different, like Peter Benchley, you fought a giant squid in one of his books.
The Beast.
Yeah, the Beast.
I was a big Benchley fan. I read a lot of Benchley books.
Or a giant moray eel or something, and Jaws would be or the shark would be the final bad guy, sure. Maybe the first one too. And then just have just 5 or 6 increasingly more elaborate maps. Maybe a password system.
They could have just made this the Meg. They could have made this the Meg. Jaws 2 could have been the Meg.
Yeah, just drop Jaws completely, or it doesn't really need the name.
Exactly.
So
just make it the Meg and just do the sequel the way it was meant to be, with the budget it was meant to have. And I think the last thing I would have liked to see is just like more like different attacks and like maybe like better diving suits that had different attributes. Like one would make you like stronger, but you'd swim slower, and you know, like kind of like a give or take kind of thing.
Yeah.
I would just like to see more to this game, though. I think the bones are really, really good in Jaws. It just needs to be fleshed out into like something like really, truly good that would be respected. I think,
I agree.
by people. But it has gotten a really bad rap, and I think that it doesn't deserve it. I think that there's a lot to love on this game, but I think there would have been a lot more to love with a very fleshed out sequel that had a higher budget.
Yeah. It seems like the people who know, like you and I aren't the only Jaws apologists. As simple as the gameplay is, I think it's just a totally like chill, almost like Zen game to play. It may be a shooter, but it's not like very stressful. Last year, I think I tried to beat it in less than 5 minutes. I think the fastest I was able to beat it was like 5 minutes and 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think that's about like, I think between 5 and 6 minutes is I think
if you get really familiar with it and get a good strategy going, you could beat it multiple times in half an hour. So
and there's speedrunners that do it in just a handful of minutes.
Yeah, I really want, that's why I wanted to get like under 5 minutes, so I can at least be maybe 4 minutes and 20 seconds might be in that range is the world record.
It's quick.
It's pretty quick though. It's not a very long game.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, what do you got for your number 2?
That would be Metal Storm.
Yes.
I think most people would have liked to have seen let me take that back. I think most people retroactively would have liked to have seen a sequel for Metal Storm. I don't think Metal Storm really exactly set the world on fire at the time.
Sadly.
When I first got my Nintendo Power subscription, my first issue was the Mega Man 3 issue. The third issue I got, Metal Storm, was the cover game. And I remember at that time, even then, it kind of looked like, it looks all right. And it was only much later.
That cover was cool, though.
It was a cool cover. That model that they had looked great.
Yeah.
So I was actually kind of, I think even then, disappointed that I don't know what the thing's name is, the suit. He's just like this little weird orange sprite. So even in Nintendo Power, the graphics might have looked a little bit disappointing. That the Nintendo Power issue might have been overselling it a bit. I think even on the Famicom, and I haven't seen this, I haven't seen any evidence of this, I think that character sprite is a different color. I think it's white.
But it's still a very flat color
it's still
too, right?
not exactly highly detailed or anything.
Exactly.
But it was only years later when I first started just getting the taste, just the barest inkling to kind of like, well, maybe I'll start buying some of these old games that I had when I was a kid. And you know what? Maybe I'll start buying some of those games that I wanted as a kid and I just never got a chance to play. I'll just start small. Just get like a little collection of like 20 games and I'll be done. I won't do it anymore.
Sure.
And Metal Storm, I think, was almost like the game that people found first. It started talking about like a hidden gem. That's how long and far it flew under everyone's radar, that it was like one of the first ones to be mined, to be kind of talked about in like, this game was so much better than we all thought when we were kids. Play it. And it was probably the first game I bought that was almost like a Grail game, I guess. It was like everyone was kind of talking about it, so I had to pay a little bit more for it than I did for my other games.
So you played through this recently as well.
Mm-hmm. I did.
Okay, so that's me as well. I just went, just like Guardian Legend, coincidentally, I played this actually back to back, which is kind of funny. I had the Nintendo Power. I thought the cover was so cool. Mm-hmm. Same deal, same issue. When I looked at the sprite was a complete turnoff. It was just really, I thought the game looked cool, but I just thought that orange flat colored sprite just didn't look interesting to me. And I don't know why I was so judgmental about it, but I think that like cover being so gorgeous, I felt like it warranted a nice sprite. And it's interesting to hear you say the exact same thing. But I bought this game, I believe in 2002. I got it for $4.99 at a Funko. I may have been a GameStop at this point, but it was a Funko Land. I still have my price sticker on it. I had to leave it on there just for shits and giggles. But I had never played it. I bought it because I always wanted to play it, and I didn't actually sit down and mess with it until just last year, and I loved it. That game it's amazing. The gravity system is so cool, and it's just, the bosses are really well designed. It's just a great game. It doesn't look that pretty outside the explosion. The death explosion is great.
Fantastic.
That's about it.
Well, and the other thing is that the screenshots don't really do, not necessarily the graphics, but the way the levels are presented. They don't really do that justice, because they do like that cool scrolling in the background, which can be distracting, but as primitive as some of these backgrounds look, you could definitely tell there's some technical know-how behind them, because they all have like a really cool kind of, I guess it's parallax scrolling, kind of.
Well, it's IREM who did R-Type. Obviously, you can. I believe one of the bosses from R-Type.
Yeah, it's the ship.
Yeah, the ship from R-Type is in there. So, cool little cameo / nod.
Now, I bought it when I think it was 2008, 2009, and I bought it complete in box for about $70. And that was kind of a good price. Like, I had to kind of shop around for a bit to find that price. Up until recently, that was one of the most. Up until recently, that was the most expensive retro game that I've ever purchased.
Okay.
I would say worth it. It was a pretty decent investment. Not that I plan on selling it anytime soon, but now that I've actually, it took me, again, I bought it in 2008, 2009. It was only like 2022 that I actually sat down and played through the game. So it took me a while to get there, but I had a lot of fun with it.
Sure. What would you want to see the sequel? Like, is there anything particular that jumps out at you?
Like, literally, just more of the same, I think is fine. Because, I mean,
it was very short. It's a short game.
Yeah, it's 6 stages, I think. So I'm fine with like 6, maybe even 8 more stages. Like, the game is actually so kind of good enough on its own that it doesn't. I don't really think it really needs that much. Just more.
Yeah, I could see. I'd like to see some more weapons. I'd like to
More
see
weapons,
kind of things
yeah.
like that, and maybe because I think the gravity loop is really cool. Where the mechanic is very interesting and unique. Which obviously you saw that show up in other games later down the road. Mega Man 5 obviously used it. There was a lot of games. I'm not sure if Metal Storm was the first one to really do it. But I know for a fact that there were many games that started to really utilize that in the late 80s. But it's kind of similar to Guardian Legend. I'd love to see more types of movement options outside of the gravity, like dashes or like, you know, being able to like hover or fly or like interesting kind of little things like that. I think would make the gameplay better.
And I'm just now thinking about this. Or maybe take a page out of like some other shooters' notebooks where maybe have more power-ups, sure. But how about have like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different suits that you can use with different power-ups. That way you don't have to like really put a whole lot of energy into power-ups that would work for each one. It would be like, well, this suit can take an extra shot, or this suit can hover, or this suit has extreme firepower, like, or this suit can. That only one suit maybe can have like the gravity flipping be an offense move. That would have been fun to see.
I think the coolest thing that I could possibly think of that IREM would have done with a sequel for one of those potential multiple suits that you mentioned would be to have an R-Type inspired one that had a force. So you can kind of have that platforming with the force involved too, to kind of like, because obviously R-Type is a shmup, you can move around at will, but having a force with a platformer that has gravity, I think would really be an interesting gameplay loop for at least like one type of suit as more of a kind of like a fun callback. Kind of obviously IREM loves to do that. So
one other thing I would have liked to see better music in a sequel. I don't think the soundtrack in Metal Storm is very good. It's actually kind of crappy in some levels. Yeah. The first music track is decent, and it's probably the best one.
It's passable, yeah.
But it's nowhere near. R-Type has had better sound, and honestly, IREM games aren't typically known for their great epic soundtracks. R-Type did have better music, I thought, than Metal Storm.
Oh yeah, Super R-Type and R-Type 3 are two of my favorite soundtracks of all time. But yeah, at that point in time, I definitely would agree that. I mean, the R-Type soundtracks are good. They have some good stuff, but they also have a lot of kind of boring.
They do.
Too, so
they do.
All right, moving on to my third one. Rob, I know you're not going to have much to say about this, because it is a sports game. But it is the best sports game ever made, in my humble opinion, and that is Bad News Baseball. If you've played it, you know how amazing it is. If you haven't, you probably saw it and thought it was just a silly another baseball knockoff, unfortunately. But it is so much more. It just plays so well. It's very simplistic, but I think that is a good thing. Probably the thing people know most about it is the cutscenes. It has insane, very anime-like cutscenes that happen when if you like hit a home run, it like switches to a cutscene where the ball is like screaming into outer space. There's another thing where if like you throw the ball from the outfield and it's a close call, it like cuts to this crazy thing where like you see close-ups of the two guys, like their eyes with like the speed lines, and like the ball's like whizzing through the air, and the guy's like running to home plate, and then it zooms in on the catcher, and the ball comes in, and then it stops, and it's like whether it shows either he's either safe, he tags it, he makes the tag, or he makes the base. But it's just like, it's unlike any other game. It's so over the top, it's so silly that, and it plays great. It plays great, but the cutscenes are what everybody remembers about this game, and it's just amazing. I don't really have a lot that I'd love to see differently. I want more cutscenes. I want more ridiculousness, more over the top. Maybe make the fielding a little bit quicker. It's such a great game. It's such a great baseball game. If you're even into baseball games at all, even a little bit, I think Bad News Baseball is the best, the NES, and I think almost anything out there, as long as you're okay with like more of like a simplified type of gameplay, it's one of the best games out there. But just go watch the cutscenes because they're very impressive for the NES. They're worth watching just for that, even if you don't play the game.
Now, oddly enough, even though I don't like sports games, I, for whatever reason, have that game in my collection. So, yeah, maybe I'll give it a shot. Now, my question is, I'm vaguely aware that there actually is a baseball series on probably multiple Nintendo or multiple systems in Japan, whether it's Famicom, Super Famicom, what have you. And I think at least one or two of those games has come over here, but got called something different. I don't know if it became...
Bases Loaded is
it
one.
Bases Loaded? Okay.
And it's like Modu fire like Modu burning baseball. I don't know the name of it, but they're like totally different names in Japan.
Like I didn't know if it was RBI baseball. That was I thought it was RBI, but
there's so many. Well, Japan has like I'm totally like exaggerating, but they have like I feel like they have like 100 games, like baseball games on the Famicom. There's so many baseball games.
I know they like baseball
a
lot, so.
Oh yeah, and it's just, but the Famicom just was like they were just dumping them over there, and that's why we got like all of these like rebranded Famicom Japanese baseball games that they came over as like, you know, RBI baseball and Bases Loaded, and I think Nintendo had their own baseball game. There's just so many, and there's a lot that didn't make it over here. But from what I've played, I would say Bad News Baseball is easily the best out of all of them, in my humble opinion. And like I said, has the most character, and it is very like, silly in that kind of like, you know, Japanese anime type of way. In my humble opinion.
No promises, but maybe I'll give it a shot.
You should.
You
I highly recommend it.
Kind of making me curious about it. So
you should be. You should be very curious. All right, what do you got next?
My next one is Astyanax. And you and I had kind of talked about this one off on the side.
This is one of those exception games.
It's kind of an exception game, I guess, because, and I didn't find out about this until somewhat recently, but the guy who designed the original Astyanax arcade game also designed Legendary Axe. And Legendary Axe did get a sequel. I believe, Chris, you said the sequel did not have his involvement, though.
It seems like he was involved with Legendary Axe, and then the Astyanax, called just simply Astyanax on the NES, and then Legendary Axe 2. So he moved from Legendary Axe to Astyanax, and then Legendary Axe 2 was had nothing to do. He was not on that team, from what I could find, anyways.
Okay.
He obviously, it seems like he left his company. I can't remember the name. It was a very strange company that made Legendary Axe, a strange name, like music publishing company, something. Something very corporate. And then he moved to Jalico, which I believe put out Astyanax.
Yes.
Jalico, right?
Yes. Yep, right there at the top.
There it is. There it is.
Go.
And I imagine Jalico was like, make us Legendary Axe, like make us our Legendary Axe. So I assume that's kind of what that was.
Now, I haven't played Legendary Axe. It's basically a TurboGrafx 16 game. However, every time I've heard someone describe Legendary Axe, the mechanics of it, and every time I've seen it played, it looks like it plays just like Astyanax. It sounds like it functions just like Astyanax, where you just have kind of a slow-moving game, and I guess like the harder you are holding the attack button down, the more power you'll hit with it, and you upgrade your attack bar over the course of the game. I love how just big and chunky the character sprites are. Like, it's probably not one of the best looking games on the NES, but you don't really see that many NES games that are as colorful and have as cool boss designs as this one does.
I was gonna say the boss designs are.
The boss designs look really
impressive.
cool. Some of them are like outright creepy. Like that tree one always kind of, I thought
they're all pretty creepy. If I
yeah, like the
remember
Medusa
correctly.
one was pretty creepy. So the bosses look great. I think even the regular stage graphics look fine. But you don't really see a big character like that, especially in like an action game. Generally, smaller characters kind of work a little better for side-scrolling platforming gameplay, which this is. But for whatever reason, it works. It also has, I think, one of the big additions that the NES had over the arcade game. It has like cutscenes, and it's like full-on Ninja Gaiden quality well, full-on cutscenes like Ninja Gaiden. I don't know if they're quite Ninja Gaiden quality.
I would say they're Ninja Gaiden quality. I personally would agree with that. I think they look as good as Ninja Gaiden. I remember specifically being very impressed with those as a kid, because I had a Styanax as a kid, and I played it all the time. I loved it. But I remember just the cutscenes, just never wanting to skip the cutscenes, because I don't even know if you can, but like never wanting to even attempt to, because I thought they were so cool. And I never had Ninja Gaiden before that, so I think that was also another thing where I was like, oh man, this is so cool looking. I had never really seen anything like that before, which was really impressive. But I think that the cutscenes.
And you can skip the cutscenes, because I did a playthrough of that, and just to keep it short, I did skip all the cutscenes, and then recommended that anyone who thought the game looked cool should play the game and actually experience the cutscenes for themselves, because it's a very cheesy, like 80s video game kind of story with that same level of almost corny innocence, but it's surprisingly in depth. It actually has like characters with motivations, and even the bad guys have multiple layers, and they're not layers like in their character, but like you have the secondary bad guy taking order for the main bad guy, and they're talking to each other about what they're gonna do. You have Cutie the fairy that's kind of guiding Styanax, the main character, all the way through the game. It's just great. I love it. So I guess in a sequel, because the story kind of wrapped itself up pretty nice, I guess. I guess the sequel would be like either a different guy, maybe, or I guess maybe Styanax goes in again. I mean,
there could be more issues, more princesses in peril. They can absolutely do more of that stuff and make him. I can't even remember exactly what the story was at this point, but I remember there's some guy that's like all in armor that's super anime looking. But I think that they could easily make a new story and have an excuse to bring back old Styanax again.
As far as like the gameplay goes, I guess maybe more weapons. Like I was so satisfied with the game. I don't really need much more to be able to be satisfied with it again.
I think I would like to see weapons play and function differently. I think that's like the big thing I would want to see in a sequel, because it's like you get the different weapons and they all are kind of the same. You know, they all function the same. They have the same meter. I'd love to see that meter kind of behave differently with different weapons, where like maybe with one it'd be kind of going back and forth and you'd have to like time your shots rather than just like let it like, you know, fill up. So maybe some more like skill-based weapons that would kind of like make things a little bit more interesting and give you a reason to like switch weapons more frequently and try different things out.
Maybe have different magic attacks that are based on what weapon you have, like Ghost and or Ghouls and Ghost did. Yeah, because I mean it's simple enough that you can kind of give it even like the smallest little tweak, and I guess make kind of a big difference there depending on what you do. More cutscenes, yeah, different bad guys. I don't know.
Definitely.
I don't know if Legendary Axe 2 really did that much above what Legendary Axe 1 did. So
I've never played him. I have no idea. I've heard of him, but I've never. Yeah, I have a PC Engine with a fresh new EverDrive I just got last week, so I'll have to take a peek at him.
Well, try out Legendary Axe. I've heard it's just like a Styanax.
Yeah, but then that means I'll probably love it. It better have great cutscenes.
I bet it doesn't.
Lots of awesome anime cutscenes.
I bet it doesn't. Which makes a Styanax a better game.
We'll find out.
Blasphemy? No.
That's true.
It's probably true.
All right. My fourth game is a puzzle game called, another IRM game called Kickle Cubicle. I'm not sure if you've played this one, but it is another one from my childhood that I am very fond of. And I think it's a game that, I think people like it. I think people that play it like it, but I think that it wasn't very popular. I think it is very a niche, hidden gem, if you will. I know everyone loves to throw that term around these days. But essentially it's a game where you can shoot little ice beam breaths and turn enemies and things into icicles, and you can push those and use those little ice blocks either as weapons, or you can fill in the stages. Like the blocks fall in the water and they'll become like a platform that you can step on. So the ultimate goal, you'll have like a stage. It's kind of like Lolo almost in a sense, But you have like these things you have to collect in each stage, and you have to kind of like generally move different platforms around and defeat enemies, and kind of like make it so you can maneuver yourself to these like little collectible items. And once you collect them all, then you move on to the next stage. But have you played Kickle Cubicle?
It was one I was excited to buy and add to my collection, and I've slept on it since then. So I haven't actually played it. I'm aware of what the gameplay is like, and I like those kind of games because it does kind of strike me as like it's top down like Lolo, but it's kind of like I guess like of the bubble bobble type genre, where it's like you have this special power up and you use that to clear the screen of enemies. I'm gathering more of a puzzle element because I imagine you have to use these ice blocks to actually progress at some point. Because they double as...
Yeah, you're kind of moving. There's springs and there's a lot of different mechanics that are introduced later on. But the main thing is he can turn things to ice and make these little cubes and push them around. And it's called Meikujima in Japan, which means Labyrinth Island, which makes a lot more sense than Kickle Cubicle. But I think Kickle Cubicle is the cool.
For some reason, I always read it in my mind as, even though I know what cubicle is, I always read it as Kickle Cubicle. It's almost like I expected that the box wanted me to rhyme those two words. So it always. Really?
Most people say it that way.
I've only ever thought of it as Kickle Cubicle or Kickle Cubicle, so it's always weird to me when people say Kickle Cubicle, even though that's probably correct.
I don't know if it's right, obviously. I have no idea. Most people I hear say it, pronounce it the way you do. They say it that way. But I have always just, like I said, I've had it since I was a kid. So I just, it's like some people call Ridley Ridley just because they called him that as a kid, and that's just it's just stuck with them. So that might be one of those things. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but honestly, I'd like to just see more of this game. There's a few things a few improvements I'd like, but overall, I just think more stages, more enemies would be really cool. I'd love some more abilities. I think one thing that would be really cool is if you could actually stick the ice cubes together and form like shapes and have to push things around that way, and that's just a random thought. And then more complex boss fights would be another thing. I think the boss fights were fine. They were very simplistic and just could have added a little bit more thought and a little bit more complexity. I think that would have been nice. But ultimately, I would have just more Kickle Cubicle stages. Kickle Cubicle stages would be very, very welcome in a sequel. And I'm sad. I guess it didn't do that well. But this is an IREM thing. It's interesting because this is the second IREM game to not get a sequel that we both think are pretty good. That probably because I hear a lot of people talk fondly about Kickle Cubicle these days, just in the same way as Metal Storm. So I have no idea. I don't know if it's just it just didn't do well, but I think it's a great game. Very overlooked.
I think NES. That maybe when it was originally conceived and developed, that style of game was more popular in the arcades, and then as the NES kind of became more long in the tooth, that bubble bobble Adventures of Lolo style gameplay kind of went away. I mean, they stopped making the Lolo games. Well, at least here in America. Yeah. I think the Lolo series went on for a while, but
did it? I did not know that.
This is totally off topic, but there's I want to say 2 or 3 Lolo games that are just like Eggerland games that I don't think we got. So you should leave this on the cutting floor because I don't actually have any know what I'm talking about really. I've just heard this and I've looked it up that there's a bunch of other Eggerland games that we didn't get because it just wasn't as lucrative. I think mainly for the Famicom. I think what we got as I think the one we got as Adventures of Lolo was actually the 3rd in the series, I think.
Really?
Needs citation.
That's wild. I did not know that. Put a big asterisk on this for now. All right. Well, moving on to your 4th game, Mr. Matthews.
My 4th game is a personal favorite of mine. This is one of my childhood games, Rygar. And I don't think I'm alone in saying that we should have got a sequel for this. Now, I know there's other Rygar games. There's Rygar for the PS2. That to me does not count as a sequel. That counts as like a reboot. I don't count that as I mean like a proper side-scrolling game, either on the NES or Genesis or Super Nintendo, in this style is what I would want.
Who made Rygar?
Tecmo.
Tecmo, okay.
Rygar is one of those Tecmo arcade games where the NES port, just like Ninja Gaiden, the NES port was radically different from the arcade game. And I think most people would probably say that the NES version of Rygar and Ninja Gaiden are probably better than the arcade games. Mainly the Ninja Gaiden one. I don't think many people like the Ninja Gaiden arcade.
I would agree.
But Rygar was, I don't know, it captivated me immediately with the big adventure that it presented you with, and the leveling up that you had to do, the multiple routes you had to take all over this world. I didn't read the manual when I was a kid, so I don't know if I really understood everything I was doing, but I somehow made my way through the game. So the game does do a pretty good job of directing you in the right, at least general vicinity of where you need to go next. Because you're collecting essentially powers in the forms of equipment. So I wouldn't really call it a Metroidvania game, but certain areas of this overworld map are locked off to you until you get the appropriate tool, whether it's a pulley to cross over ropes, or a crossbow that will actually let you, shoot your own rope across chasms.
I've played Rygar, I've just never finished it. But I would agree with you that it's like kind of Metroidvania. But
it's more of like just an adventure game.
Yeah.
I think Rygar is less of a Metroidvania game, as Metroid uses elements from Rygar style games. That's kind of the way I would look at it, where it's just an adventure game. I think it plays, in a nutshell, like a side-scrolling, or at least 8-bit God of War game. I mean, God of War is kind of using the same kind of principles, where you kind of have this illusion of having this big open world map. I'm talking again about the classic God of War games, not new God of War. Certain...
Well, the PS2 game is that, right?
PS2 game plays an awful lot like a very early God of War game. And
yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
Rygar came first. So...
Oh, really? Rygar came
You could
before
argue maybe that God of War might have been inspired by the PS2 Rygar game. Maybe.
Huh.
They're both Greek-inspired games. It's been a long time since I played the PS2 game, but I think it leaned a bit more into almost like static screens, like Resident Evil did, so it was probably easier to do. So it was God of War that actually gave you like the more bigger rooms, but still the set camera movements where it was very scripted what the camera did. And Rygar kind of plays the same way. With you still have the same, light and heavy attacks and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So it got a sequel, but we're not really counting that, essentially.
I don't even know if even they consider it a sequel. I think they just kind of consider
it's
it
probably
just
a
like
reboot.
a reboot.
I think it's probably I would say that. So what would you want to see in a Rygar 2 on the NES or Super NES?
I had a feeling you were going to ask me that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, a bigger world, maybe an extra weapon or two, because you really only had not even really. You had the same weapon all the way through the game. You just kind of got stronger. So more weapons, similar to, I'll just kind of stick with God of War as a pretty good framework. Similar to how Kratos had extra weapons also. He mainly used the Blades of Chaos, but he also had a big spear, a giant hammer, a sword, other weapons that he could use in addition to those. Or in God of War 3, he had basically different forms of the Blades of Chaos. That would be neat to see.
Is there a lot of backtracking in Rygar?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, you're going up here to beat this area, and then now you have the pulley, so you go down here to cross this canyon that you saw earlier, and now you get this, you go up here to this other. So there is some backtracking. So
okay, so is that Metroid kind of feel to it?
Yeah, kind of.
I've played it. I just haven't finished it. It's on my to-do list to actually complete Rygar, because it's been one I've wanted to do for a while, but I always start it and then I get sidetracked with something else. So
once you know what to do, it's actually a pretty quick game. Learning the game will probably take you better part of a weekend. Then if you know everything and actually have a path planned for what to do, it probably takes you maybe an hour to beat the game.
Okay. So a guide is not. You don't think a guide would be required?
I don't think so. I mean, there are.
Okay.
I don't think there are. I mean, the world map is not so big that if you get lost and you start wandering around, eventually you're going to find out where you need to go. Now, obviously, having kind of a map will give you kind of like an edge and kind of cut down on some of the mindless wandering if it comes to that. But I don't think it's so complicated that you really need. I mean, obviously, I did it as a kid. I was a dumb kid, so I think smart.
So was I.
I think smart adults like us can handle it just fine. But as far as like the backtracking goes, I don't really mind that in games like this because you don't really appreciate how much stronger you've gotten unless you're forced to go through previous areas, and now you could just cut through enemies like butter when on your first way through, they give you a lot of trouble. So I think backtracking is, you need to do some backtracking, I think, in games where you are leveling up and getting stronger.
That's why I hate scaling enemy levels. That's my least favorite thing.
Yeah, you never really feel like you're making progress.
Exactly. You come back to that area and you're just like, wait a second. Like, I don't feel like I've done anything. You know, you don't have that sense of like power, like you've buffed up.
And that's in going off on another tangent a little bit.
That's a whole tangent. Sorry,
no,
I'm
that's
not
right.
even getting into that.
No, on that same thought, I think Gargoyle's Quest is a perfect game, almost. I think that's the one thing that Gargoyle's Quest, maybe probably 1 and 2 did incorrect, I guess, where it didn't really give you very much backtracking. So you never really got the sense that you were getting stronger when all the enemies were scaling up with you. You received new abilities exactly when the game is now expecting you to use them. Whereas in Rygar, you are going back and exploring areas and seeing where, now I know what I need to do with this rope, because now the game has given me the tool to bypass this obstacle. So I think Rygar is just like the perfect example of a wonderful little adventure game. And all I would say to do with the hypothetical sequel that we never got is bigger map, maybe more items, more tools. Even the music was great. Just more of that.
Gotcha. Well, no, Rygar 2. Maybe someday we'll get. Wait, is Tecmo still around? Did Tecmo get absorbed by somebody?
If
anyone
anyone
ask for Rygar sequel.
If anyone is left at Tecmo, I think they are.
Oh, Koei. Yeah, Koei.
Yeah,
Tecmo.
that's right.
Tecmo Koei, I believe. Yeah. They merged with Koei. All right. So my final game is kind of cheating because it is a sequel. Kind of. I mean, it is a sequel, but it sort of doesn't count in a way. I'll explain it in a second.
I'm confused.
So, Goonies 2 is my last game that I think should have gotten a sequel, deserved a sequel. So, there are 2 Goonies games in the NES/Famicom library. We did not get the first Goonies game over here. It is a Famicom exclusive. I actually have the cart, I just don't have it near me. But we did get Goonies 2. And the games are very different in terms of the second one added these dungeon crawling adventure sequences. So it's almost like you're moving from screen to screen and you're in this first person view, and you start the game off it's a side-scrolling, like a very Metroidvania type of game. So it is a platformer, but you go into doors, and then you're in these doors where you can use your fist to like bang on the wall and make a door appear, or you can acquire a hammer and bang on the door and knock a hole into there, but you need a ladder to like put into the hole to like go down it. So it's very much like dungeon crawlery adventure game kind of style. Exploration combined with a platformer like Metroidvania, like large open map to move around. And this is a Konami game. It's amazing Konami game. I know a lot of people don't like this game for the very repetitive and trial and error gameplay of the dungeon stuff, but I love this game so much. I think it's one of the most unique Famicom games out there. It's an incredibly experimental game. And it's not perfect by any means. It has plenty of flaws, but just seeing them try to do something so crazy was just really a lot of fun to like play and experience. and just kind of like see this like very like these two like very conflicting types of gameplay types kind of like mashed together in this this gameplay loop. It's just a really cool game. Have you played Goonies?
I played it a little bit. I mainly played it when I was a kid. This was in the very, very early days, because I think it was a pretty early NES game.
88, I think?
Yeah, so when I was playing it, the games I was typically playing was Contra, Goonies 2, Legend of Kage. Very simple games, because we were transitioning from the Atari 2600. We barely could even comprehend that games were longer than a couple screens. The weird thing is that as kids, we never questioned that it was Goonies 2. Well, what happened to Goonies 1? We knew what Goonies 1 was. Clearly the game was a sequel to the movie. And that was just what my friends and I all just kind of assumed. And maybe that's what Konami was counting on us all to think, because they could have called it Goonies when they brought it here. They could have started bringing Goonies 1.
Yeah.
So it was an odd choice on their part to start with the second one and then keep it as Goonies 2. But for whatever reason, we all just kind of went with it.
There was definitely some kind of market research that was going on there, or something, because that's just it was a bizarre choice to just, why not just call it Goonies?
Yeah.
You know, like why, unless they were just too lazy to edit the box art, because the box art I believe is very similar, and the title screens are very similar as well, so maybe they didn't want to have to, it was a quick and easy port for them maybe, but yeah, I don't know. It's a very bizarre game. But it's kind of like Metroid, where you're getting different types of items that will help you like traverse. Like you get like spring shoes that let you jump higher. You get like different types of weapons you can use to fight enemies. And the other cool thing about it is the map is, you have this like large open world map. Think like Metroid 1, but the maps are kind of like on top of each other. So you can go through a door and then go to this back map. And then this is a whole totally different map with different music, different enemies, usually slightly different environment. And you're kind of like going through the levels and going back and forth to this like front map, then back and forth to this back map, back and forth as you're progressing through the game. Which brings me to my first thing I'd like to see in a Goonies 3, if you will. Either ditch the mirrored areas or make it easier to track them, because I think that's one thing where sometimes you start to get lost with these. You're like, am I on the back one or the front one? Or either a large giant map and just ditch the mirror thing altogether, or make the mirror thing a bit easier to track. And I think that's another thing where the maps are kind of like hard to discern in Goonies 2 as to where you're at. So you kind of have to draw your own maps, in my opinion, to like kind of get through this game, at least and have a good time. So something like that. And I'd also love to see kind of like the ability to level up your stats, kind of like more RPG-ish kind of thing, kind of like Symphony of the Night, essentially. I'd love to see more stuff like that in this. And finally, just I think the biggest problem with that game that so many people dislike is just the trial and error dungeon thing. So you pretty much just have to cycle through all your tools and like hit every single wall. And try out your fist on every wall, then try out the hammer on every wall, and then try on the glasses in every single room to see if like something mysterious pops up. Like, I think what they need to do is have the tools have more of a specific type of use, rather than just like this, just use this on everything you possibly can to try it out. It's because it's not really fun at that point, because you're not really trying to figure anything out. You're just like, you're kind of going through the motions in every single room just to make sure you don't miss anything. So having the tools and having like the hammer maybe like have a different type of functionality that you would know what you need to use for it, I think would help with that trial and error kind of aspect. I think that's really what they needed to tweak a bit more in the grand scheme of things, and that would, I think, make the game a lot better. Even if they left everything the same and just fixed that more dungeon adventure game kind of first person section, I think that would just make that game so much better. And
one more thing to add to that, the soundtrack is excellent. I still just casually listen to the cover of Good Enough that the game opens up with.
Yep.
And
Goonies are good enough.
the other tracks of the game are it's what you would expect from Konami. Konami games have excellent soundtracks. Goonies represents that very well.
Yeah.
I haven't, for as little as I've played the game, the soundtrack is pretty high up there on my favorite NES soundtracks.
Oh, it's great. And when you get later in the game, there's a lot of other tracks that are amazing too. It's classic Konami. And then you have one more.
I do.
Rob? You have one last.
And just like the rest of our last couple games, we're kind of cheating a little bit on this. That's going to be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Very Konami heavy these last few games.
Yeah.
Because Konami made great games that they should have made more of. Clearly, the NES, just the NES alone, got 2 sequels to Ninja Turtles. I don't mean a sequel in the style of the arcade game. Obviously, Ninja Turtles 2 was just a port of the arcade game. Ninja Turtles 3 was a sequel to that game. I want another game that is like this game. I would say this is probably a completely different game than any other Ninja Turtles game that appeared, at least in the 8 and 16-bit era. I don't think any of the games were like that. I like the level-based or the stage-based, whatever, game progression is kind of laid out kind of like a Castlevania game, I guess. More exploration heavy. It did have an overworld map for each stage, so it's almost like structured in the way that you and I are kind of wishing that a Jaws sequel could be arranged with a 5 or 6 overworld maps, and then the game is kind of branches out from there. What are some of the things that people hate about? Because I like the game a lot, so I'm just kind of drawing a blank on what specifically people hate about it. I guess it has weird controls. So obviously, if there's a sequel, I think the controls could be the jumping mechanics are a little funky. They could be made easier to use.
I'd say less floaty jumping. Would be something I would like to see in the sequel. A sequel to this game, yes. Maybe,
because obviously the way that they wanted to make them cool, so that's why they gave them the flipping. Maybe make their base jump be like Contra, where he's still doing the flip, and then maybe you have to crouch down or hold up to do a super jump or something like that, and then be able to control it better, like you can in Contra. Because it is very difficult to control the jumps, and the game demands very precise platforming from you at multiple points of the game, and it's notoriously frustrating to kind of pull some of that stuff off. So that could be probably one of the number one things that they could fix in a sequel. I would also say that maybe balance out the turtles a little better, because Donatello, very overpowered in the game. Michelangelo, very underpowered. There were some, like Raphael, it was pointed out to me that Raphael actually has some strengths that the other turtles don't have. Like he can, he can one-shot like the bug enemies, like the flying moths or whatever they are, and I believe the spiders. And have you beaten the game? Have you seen all the way through the game?
I've seen all the way through the game. I've never finished it myself. I'm not good enough to beat this game, apparently.
I had to practice, and I beat it one time.
I've come close. I've never actually sealed the deal, though.
I
have a lot of complaints about it. I don't think it's as good of a game as I think everybody else does, but I think it has a lot. It's kind of like Goonies 2. A lot of great stuff, but not executed perfectly, which is like kind of what you're talking about.
And actually, I would say that I don't even know if there's a lot of people that think it's very good. I think it's probably almost like an even split, where people who are Ninja Turtles apologists are like, you know what, it's not that bad. You have people like on your side, they're like the fact you have to say it's not that bad means it's that bad. I love the game. It's mainly based on, I guess, nostalgia. I was a huge Ninja Turtles fan. This was a big moment when we finally got a Ninja Turtles game on everyone's favorite video game console. So I accepted a lot of these flaws, as did everyone else I knew. Of course, we were all, 8, 9, 10, so we didn't have any taste or anything, so we didn't know what we were really talking about. It really took more of like a seasoned perspective to really kind of dissect what makes the game bad in some areas. As kids, we all just kind of went along with it.
I will say I like it more nowadays. I think I didn't like it very much as a kid, especially with that second level. I was so bad at that second level as a kid, but the dam level, the dam level. But I think I've come around on it now, and I think I consider it a lot. I think it's a better game than I gave it credit for. Than I didn't get it credit for when I was a kid. But I love the shared life bar thing aspect too, where I thought that was such a cool idea, where the turtles kind of all it's like you have one giant life bar that you're kind of switching around. And I didn't think about that until your video. Your video is what made me be like, oh, I guess it is just one big life bar split into 4 pieces.
Yeah, you're just kind of like controlling
managing
like eight chunks at a time.
Yeah, which I think is really cool.
Because I mean, a lot of those stages, because each turtle is essentially your life, I guess, one of your lives. Like in that dam level in particular, if you take a lot of damage on your first attempt through and you don't complete the level, then you are at a major disadvantage, having lost that HP now at the very start of the stage. And I know that the dam level was very challenging for us as kids. However, unfortunately, having seen the rest of the game after that, I kind of had the perspective of we didn't even know what we were up against later because we never got to that point. It gets way harder. I felt really lucky if I were able to get to the third stage when I was a kid, and there was no chance that I was beating that. It's just a big maze. It's very hard to avoid taking damage in the game. The game is very mean. The game plays very rough, so it's easy to get your ass handed to you very quickly. So these were all things that I would ideally like to see fixed in a hypothetical sequel. Better balancing between the turtles so that Donatello isn't completely overpowered and Michelangelo isn't so under, because there's like a big gulf. There's no reason to play as Michelangelo. If you have Leonardo or Donatello.
He's your fodder. He's your damage fodder for
Raphael and Michelangelo just kind of kill these guys first, and then that way I can at least have a chance to hopefully beat the rest of the stage with one of the good turtles. Make it so there is no good turtle. How about that? Which they eventually kind of did with the other games.
I'd love to see some extra characters too, like Splinter or some of the Usagi Yojimbo, like some of these other characters kind of come in and have maybe other abilities as well that you can kind of. So I would love for it to stay where you have 4 players. But I think it would be really cool if you could kind of like before each stage create a team essentially. So like pick from 12 different Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles characters and like build a team of 4. And you still have that shared life bar mechanic that kind of like makes that game like special that like the arcade games, like the sequels didn't have. But I think that it would be really cool to have more versatility. That would probably make it more of a challenge to balance, obviously. But more versatility in being able to choose these different characters that had more moves and different like strengths and weaknesses.
What I usually kind of do is, instead of trying to design like a perfect hypothetical unicorn game, is look at what Konami has done in other games. So in Castlevania 3, they did have like a character switching mechanic. So you can choose to play as either one of the 4 turtles at any time, but then maybe Casey Jones could be your Grant Dynasty, or one of the frogs.
Dynasty.
Dynasty?
You say
I don't want to call him
pronounce it correctly.
That sounds bad.
Isn't that his name? Isn't it spelled wrong? Dynasty? Am I getting that wrong?
I should have just said Alucard, but but swap him in, and maybe Casey Jones can do stuff that the other turtles can't. All right, now we're just getting crazy. Where
we're getting wild now. We're getting really wild.
Maybe each turtle has, similar to what they did in the third Game Boy game, where each turtle has a specific power-up that is useful, that you need to do to do something else in the stage, like break through a certain wall, or climb up to a certain area, or drill down through a floor. I guess if you're gonna be able to lose your turtles, you can't really make these things too critical.
That's a quick way to soft lock.
I guess just do more, make the turtles feel like more of a team.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that would be kind of cool, especially if there was. I mean, the way that they at some point they had it so like what's the this is a way later game, 2006 2007, 2008. But Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, I think, really had the swapping of the characters. They really kind of had it down at that point, and I'd like to see something like that with the Turtles and that type of like the NES style of platforming gameplay.
Yeah, that would be cool. So Konami has given examples of how they could, I guess, improve on the game.
But I agree. I love the arcade games. I think Turtles 2 and 3 are great, but I would have preferred to see them, especially nowadays, make that really improve on that NES game, because I think that was I think they really had something special there.
They did.
But I don't think it's something I can look back on and say that it was like perfect and even close to perfect. I think it was like I said, it's like Goonies 2, where there was like a lot of really great forward-thinking ideas that really just could have been fleshed out had they had a second game to keep going with that, to keep going on that path. So I agree.
Like, as much as I like the game, it's definitely not in my, I don't know if I could put it in my top 20 NES games. Maybe it would get some extra credit for being like a nostalgic game. At the same time, there are some really great things about it. The graphics look really good. I love the soundtrack that has great, again, it's a Konami game. Of course it has really great music, and there's some really iconic, I like the overall theme, is fantastic.
And the intro.
That badass intro. Hey, on that, how about some more cutscenes? Similar in quality to the...
That's the theme.
There you go. Throw more cutscenes,
man.
More cowbell, more cutscenes. And also, one of the other complaints, and this is legit, because I had the same complaints when I was a kid, more recognizable characters. There is like Mousers and Foot Soldiers, and then after that, it was just a bunch of unrelated random enemy sprites that could have come from any game. So how about...
I still think it started out as not a Turtles game.
You're probably right on
I don't have any
I feel
proof.
like they probably had like some kind of like half-baked shell of a project that they had probably just never really got anywhere with, that they kind of repurposed and salvaged for most of this game.
That's my assumption, but like I said, I don't think there's any proof of that anywhere. I think a few people have just pointed out how many odd things there are that are very un-Turtle-like.
Yeah.
But they really, in the later games, like the arcade games and the Game Boy games, they really kind of got things rolling. They feel like Turtles games, at that point. But this felt like they kind of skinned some of the bosses as Turtles, and obviously the enemies just felt very
all over the place. One explanation I heard, and this is fair, that obviously the Ninja Turtles kind of came from the US. So what I have heard is that Konami hadn't even really heard of the Ninja Turtles yet. So I think they had to, when they got contracted to make the game, so I think they had to do some scrambling really quick to figure out what they need to do and what kind of essential assets they need to make a Ninja Turtles game. So they looked at the cartoon, they looked at the comic books. That's why Bebop and Rocksteady are in it, but the Shredder is from the comics. Also, the design of even the cartoon version of Shredder, even the toy manufacturer didn't know what that was supposed to look like. So
I remember that. That's why it looks so weird.
That character design for the toy is based on the comic. That's his classic pose from the first time he was actually introduced in the comic. So that's the explanation I heard. And then by the time it was time to make the arcade game, Konami's very, very, very good, very good, and got really famous for being very good at fan fiction or at fan service. So Turtles the arcade game was exactly the video game I wanted. Just so
Absolutely.
perfect. And people would say the same thing about The Simpsons and the X-Men arcade.
Yeah, Konami really nailed those licensed properties in the early mid '90s for sure. They were just knocking it out of the park left and right, especially with fan service for sure.
But they unfortunately found that the beat 'em up genre seemed to work the best for the Turtles. I would have liked to seen at least one more attempt at a exploration Castlevania style, Contra style game like what we got first. Give that formula another try before settling into the beat 'em ups.
You never know. Obviously we just got that Turtles game. Turtles is still popular, so I wouldn't be surprised if maybe someday you know, Konami's been kind of open about these like kind of indie people coming in here and taking over some projects. So I would be very curious and potentially hopeful that maybe something like that could happen in the next, like, you know, 10 to 15 years if the climate is right and they find the right person to do it and pitch it, you know. So I guess time will tell. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm saying anything's possible.
Mine either, but I would like to go into that bizarro universe where Konami gave it another shot. Maybe one day I'll visit that realm.
I would agree. All right, well, let's wrap everything up. I appreciate you joining me for this, Mr. Matthews. If you can please tell everybody where they can find you and what you do on YouTube.
I'm on YouTube as Mr. Matthews. I'm one of the few Mr. Matthews on YouTube. I mainly focus on retro games, NES, obviously a lot. Also Game Boy. Those are the main things I kind of focus on. But I like to
excellent.
Like to review games I like, and I like to review games that I don't like also. So those are always fun to kind of trash.
He's currently working through the entire Game Boy library, reviewing every single Game Boy game and kind of talking about them. It's called the Good, the Bad, the Game Boy. It's a new series he's been doing, which is excellent. I highly recommend checking it out.
Oh, thank you, Chris.
So, but yeah, thanks for joining me on this. This is just a fun little informal, conversation topic.
Yeah, kind of a what if thing, kind of.
Absolutely, yeah. That's kind of been the theme I've been throwing around here the last few weeks. But yeah, I had a lot of fun talking about this. This has always been something I've wanted to chat about. This has like kind of been like something I've thought about for the last like probably like 10, 15 years. And I'm glad that I finally could sit down and kind of go through all this. Maybe in the future we'll do some different consoles and some different games that we'd like to see sequels for, hypothetical sequels.
Or maybe some developers are watching this right now. We're giving them some ideas what they can do to actually give us these sequels, bring some of these fantasies to life.
Exactly. Goonies 3.
Best case scenario.
Make it happen. Yep, exactly.
Rygar 2.
All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for watching. What's up,
Rygar 2. I don't know.
Rygar 2 and Rygar. We got a lot of games. And Jaws 2. Make it happen. We got it. The Meg.
Yeah,
Jaws 2.
Call it the Meg. That's fine.
Colon the Meg. Yeah. Anyways, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will catch you next time.